Well, what is up, Resonate Church? Great to see you. As Drew said, my name is Keith. I'm lead pastor, and we're so excited that you guys are here. I also want to shout out to Eastern Washington and Central Washington University. So glad you guys are with us on video. Glad to have you with us. As Drew said, we are in the second part of this series called Live Sent. And as I think about this, and I was reflecting over some stuff, and I need you to know a little bit about me. When it comes to movies, I do not like surprises, and it's not that I don't like plot twists. It's not that I don't like when there's some interesting things that were foreshadowed and they come out. What I don't like is when genres violate what they're supposed to do, right? And so when you go and get a movie or when you download a movie, you kind of understand what you're getting. And so it's like when you're in the drama movie, and all of a sudden there's like this scare scene. You're like, hold it, you just crossed genres. That was a foul. That's like a movie foul, right? And so when you're in this and you try to figure out, okay, I'm renting this movie or whatever, and I know what I'm going to get. I'm downloading this thing. I kind of know what kind of movie, and I just don't like it when the genres get blurred, and everybody should kind of stay in their cookie cutter lane, right? This is just what makes sense, because when I want to watch something, I want to know what I'm going to get. And I remember one of the movies that screamed cookie cutter plot was in this movie that I know what I'm going to get when I rent this movie was a movie by the name of Con Air. Have you ever seen the movie Con Air, right? I think we have here we go, right? Con Air from a long time ago. And Con Air was it's this idea, obviously, it just screams cookie cutter plot, right? And if you're thinking, I bet someone tried to figure out if he could bet Keith to weave in the movie Con Air into his sermon, right? And you're only half true with that. So in that, you see, this is all these people in there. Nicolas Cage is the lead actor in this movie, and he does his classic Nicolas Cage kind of stuff, right? He does his, all he does is either whisper or yell, right? Whisper or yell. It's all that he does. It's kind of his thing. I know right now you're thinking through, oh, that's exactly right. It's like every movie that Tom Cruise is in, he runs, right? This is Nick Cage's thing, right? He whispers and yells, and he's made a living off of this kind of acting. But still, we go to see his movies, right? And I thought, I know exactly what I'm getting with this, right? There's this, it's a movie about transporting prisoners, right? And so I've seen this. It's just, different genres, right? Or different actors, different storyline, different plot. I've seen the same movie over and over. And so he stays true to this plot line. But then in the middle of this, you start to see this thing comes out, because Nicolas Cage is obviously, he can't be the bad guy, so he is a guy who's been kind of wrongly accused, and he's getting let out of prison. And he has a daughter that he's never met, and he's bringing to her this little bunny, right? But then it goes horribly wrong, of course, and along the way, trying to just simply go back to see this daughter that he's never met, he encounters action. And he encounters difficulty, and he encounters things that he must use his skills to remove himself out of and fight the bad guys. So this is this idea that's coming down. And so I'm watching this movie, right? And then it kind of progresses, and they go through the 29 fight scenes, and finally he gets kind of to the end of the movie. And in the end of the movie, he takes this bunny and he kneels down to his daughter, and by the time that he gets there, through all of the action scenes and all the fights, this bunny has gone from like this cute little fluffy thing to this like oily, grimy, beat up thing, and yet he still says, "Here, take this bunny." And she's like, immediately, right? I have this ex-con as a dad, and he's giving me this soiled bunny, and she's like, "No," and so we see this thing happen. And then, she changes, and ultimately she accepts the gift. And what happened there? This is where the foul happened, right? Because I'm, watching along mindlessly, and all of a sudden, I'm crying at Con Air, right? I hear he's down on his knee. He's trying to offer up his soiled bunny to his daughter that he's never seen, and I'm just like, I'm just all that he's been through, and I'm just, I don't have any of that past, but I'm like connecting with his character, right? Not an ex-con, just for your information. But this is one of those things that I'm just like, how in the world am I having all this emotion come out, right? And so I fist bumped my buddy and said, I'd accept the bunny too, right? Go. And I sit there, I'm like, why am I crying at Con Air? And I just don't understand it. And so for days, I'm just trying to think, what kind of my dude am I? Am I like, I cried at Con Air, right? And I began to realize that there's just this reality that this guy, this bunny is this symbol of redemption, and he goes through all this stuff, and it's not perfect, but yet at the end, the person he deeply wants to accept that, accepts who he is, and that all the stuff that he went through, it somehow mattered, and there was purpose, and he got to it at the end. There was something that was significant at the end, and I just began to realize that what it was stirring within me were those same things that I think in some ways stir within all of us, this idea that all the things that we matter at some point, no matter if they're like perfect or we hold that soiled bunny in our hands, we present it and we want it to matter. We want all the things that we've gone through in our life to somehow at some point in our life get to this place where we say, yes, I accept that. I want for that. We don't want to feel rejected. We want to somehow understand that what we're doing matters in this. And this is a significant thing. And for us, I think this is one of the explorations in our life. And this is one of the realities that we're all trying to figure out. And we talked about last week this idea of living a life of meaning and the fact that sometimes we're scared of dying because we don't know if we've lived a life that's full of meaning. And in this, what we begin to see is this hope. And oftentimes on this side of the sun here on earth, we have a hope that what we're doing matters, but we don't know for sure. And what I want to talk to you today about is this idea that there's some of these deep things within us that we question, is what we're doing all throughout our life, not talking about the relationships that give us meaning, but the things that we do in our life. How do we know that that's meaningful? How do we know that what we're doing is significant enough that we don't look back and have regrets in our life? And the great thing is for us today, as we get into the text, as we get into the Bible, it has something to tell us that gives us absolute clarity on how we can have a guaranteed life that's full of meaning. And so I want to press into this, and I want us to see what this looks like. If you've been around Resonate Church, you know that we are a church that's built around Jesus, that we are a church that elevates Jesus, that worships Jesus, that orients our life around Jesus, that every time that you come to a gathering of Resonate Church, you're going to hear the name Jesus, because that's this kind of church that we are, and we believe that Jesus is who he said he was, and he did what he said he was going to do, and that is to reconcile a lost world to a holy God. And in the context of that, what he does is he says, here's what I want you to do. I'm here not only to reconcile you to God, but to reveal how you are to live. And so we begin to say for our lives, for those of you who follow Jesus, we are pointing them to Jesus. We're pointing our lives to Jesus, that we want to emulate Jesus, that we are disciples of Jesus. And here's what Jesus says. When we begin to look at this, when we begin to look at the text, this is what begins to be kind of overwhelming to me, is that when we look at who Jesus is and how Jesus saw himself and his purpose and the actions that he took on this earth, he clarifies what they're all connected to. He says over and over of himself, he said, I am sent. I am a sent person, that I'm here because I'm on a mission to do something, that I'm sent in this kind of way. In fact, 44 times in the New Testament, Jesus refers to himself as being sent. And this kind of culminates with Jesus, who's saying, I'm coming to this earth, right? And what I'm doing is I came and lived this perfect life. And in the context of imperfect people, what I did is I decided that I was going to sacrifice this perfection. I was going to sacrifice my life, even though I'd done nothing wrong, for the sins of everyone else. And we see Jesus. He goes and he lives his life. He selects 12 guys to be his disciples. We see the masses come. We see him heal. We see him do all these amazing things. Ultimately, as he begins to live his life out, as he begins to display and teach the gospel, this gets him in hot water. And ultimately, he sets up the scenario where he sacrifices his life on a Roman cross for you and for I. And so what happens is then he is taken, he is killed on that Roman cross. Then he's put into a grave. on Easter and every other day, really, we celebrate this reality that on the third day, Jesus overcomes death. He overcomes this sin that entangles us, the darkness, all these things that are wrong with the world. He overcomes this. By the power of the gospel, he overcomes all that is wrong, and he rises from that grave. He overcomes something, and what he does changes all of the world, right? He does something that radically changes the world. And what they find as they go to the grave, expecting to find a Jesus who is there, is they find nothing. And here, the reality is that this could have been the end of the story. That the end of the story of the Bible could have been, they went to the tomb was empty, and they remembered all the things that Jesus had said, that this was the plan, that Jesus had set this up from the very beginning, and them arriving at the tomb and having nothing there was exactly what he did to reveal his power over death. But that's not what happens. As we begin to look in the Bible, what we begin to see is that Jesus takes 40 days and he stays here on earth. And during those 40 days, he begins to point all of his followers to this new reality that he had gone through and that he had done something that changes the fabric of humanity. In fact, it changes all of heaven and earth, that something had happened, but he stays around because there's something that he needs to communicate to his followers in order for them to understand exactly what's going on. He says in John chapter 20, verse 21, this is one of those moments that they gather together, and here's what happens. They say this. Again, Jesus says, "Peace be with you." And this is short and sweet. "As the Father has sent me, I am sending you." As the Father has sent me, I am sending you. This is what Jesus is putting all of this together. He's saying, here's the reality, that all of what God's story has been doing in the world, all the things that God has been setting up have culminated to the moment that I get out of the grave and reveal that death no longer has a hold on us. But I'm going to stick around 40 more days. Jesus didn't have to do that, right? In order to communicate that that's not the end of the story. That the end of the story is not just us not feeling guilty in this life. The end of the story is not just us being able to have heaven as our final destination. The end of the story is not just us being able to say, this is great, now I have security in the thing that's going to happen after I die. Jesus says, I've come so that you know that that's not the end of the story. And at the end of the story, what we see is something that is related back to us and the purpose of our life and making sure that we understand this. You see, Jesus is pointing us to this reality. He's saying, I'm doing all of this. I'm staying around for 40 more days in order for you to get this truth, that you were saved so that you know that you're sent. You are saved to be sent. This is what has happened. So oftentimes in church, what we think about is the end of the moment where we begin to say, I'm going to follow Jesus. But not this reality that following Jesus puts us in a trajectory that changes the focus and the purpose of our life. So he's saying, here's this reality, and about 120 people are the people, after the masses came and went, about 120 people were left. And these were the people that were followers of Jesus. And what is amazing is this, that he tells them, I've saved you to send you. And so that you know that there's no missing the idea that every single Christian is sent. And they're sent, that we have been redeemed so that we might be the force of reconciliation or the force of restoration in this world. So that God says, here's your purpose. I'm going to give you what you're to be doing. I want to make sure that you get this loud and clear. This is the thing that I've come for you to do from here on out. About 120 people are the people that receive this. And what is amazing about this is this group of about 120 people, they begin to see this seed of the gospel. They begin to see this spread in a rapid, exponential kind of way. In the context of this, that we see 2,000 years later, that 2.2 billion people on this world say that they would follow Jesus. And in this, what made this most significant movement in humanity happen? Was it the fact that these people had some sort of inherently special nature about them, that God handpicked at 120 high-capacity people that would be able to do something that would change the world? that Jesus would say, here, I'm going to focus all this to make sure that these are the people that are going to get it done. It's unlikely. In fact, when you look at the 12, right, that he poured the most time into, everybody else said, those are not the people that we would think would be the people that would actually be able to do something. That others looked upon them and said, really, these guys, these are the people that Jesus chose to be the people that held this mission and took this out. And so I would think if the 12 that did not meet up to everyone's expectations were a part of this, at the 120, there was nobody there that would maybe be exceptional in the kind of the eyes of the world. In fact, I would say in this room, what we would see is that there are people in these kind of towns. Most of you are college students, that you're getting degrees, or you have careers for some of you. You're probably of a higher capacity than the original people who started the movement of Christ. And if we begin to think about this idea, that 120 people represent about 10% of the people who now come to Resonate Church on a weekly basis. Here's what is mind-blowing about this, and here's what I begin to believe, that what happened then, that there's nothing special about them that can't happen now to see exponential growth of the gospel in the context of where we're at. See, all they understood was this. All that was special about them is they actually took Jesus seriously. They obeyed him. They said, okay, you rose from the dead. You say that we're sent, so we're going to go, and we're going to take this gospel. And this is a powerful, powerful thing. And in this idea that we have, that we are called to live this out, one of the things I want to find out for us is as we look through the context of the American church, what we don't see is the kind of exponential growth that these people saw. And I really believe that when we look in the Bible, we cannot read the Bible and what the Bible talks about the church without saying, hey, there's something that's missing today that is there from the very beginning. And what is that? What is that thing that is missing from our context, that we don't see the kind of exponential growth that this movement started out with? Because it's there at the very beginning. And I think there's a couple of lies. That there's a couple of lies that we're believing. And I want to walk through these two lies and help us to understand what God's intent is for our purpose to call out who we are to his idea of what the church is meant to be. The first thing that I believe is a lie is this, that many of us don't believe that we're called. The lie would be this, that I'm not called, that somehow I don't believe that I'm a part of the mission of God, that I'm a part of what Jesus said to go and do. Jesus says, I'm going to send you, but somehow for us, we don't believe that actually applies to us. And so we look back, and we're going to look at another passage, and we're going to see that this is what Jesus is saying. In fact, this is called the Great Commission. In Matthew chapter 28, verse 18, it says this: Jesus came to them, he's talking about his disciples, and he said, all authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. So just to let you know, guys, I beat down death. All the things that are wrong with this world, all the sin that has created all the sickness and death and everything that is wrong with the world today, I've beaten that down. I've overcome that. What I did made that powerless. So I've all authority on heaven and earth, all of the cosmos, all of humanity, all of the earth has changed because of this reality. And so here's what happens. Here's what's next. Because of that, he said this: therefore, go and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit, teaching them to obey everything I have commanded, and surely I am with you to the very end of the age. Because I have done this, and now I'm leaving, and I'm giving you this mandate. I'm giving you this initiative to take out this mission. Here's what you are to do. It looks like this. But I just want to talk about those first two words. In the context of what Jesus has done in the resurrection, he says, therefore, go. And when you look in the languages, in the original language of what that means, what the word go means, if you were to take the Aramaic or the Ugaritic, Hebrew, the Greek, if you were to kind of just look deeper in that, go in those languages means go. It really means don't stay. This is the idea behind all of that. When you boil it down, what it means is that Jesus says, here, I'm going to send you out so that you would go. And for us to be able to understand, this is not given to just a few people. This is given to everyone who says, I follow Jesus. He said, if you understand what I've done, then placed upon you is the mandate to go. For us to be able to understand that we are to go. See, oftentimes, here's what happens, is that we're waiting on a voice. We're waiting on something, a voice from God, but he's already given us a verse. We're waiting on a voice. We're waiting on something to say, hey, Keith, you need to go and do this. And we believe somehow erroneously that it requires a special call to have our lives pointed towards the mission of God. And that's what like special people called missionaries and pastors and full-time ministers do. But as we begin to look at the text, here's the power of the gospel. The power of the gospel, the power of the church, what he said is that every single one of us, there's no delineation, there's no dichotomy between those people who are called to be on staff at a church or a pastor or a missionary and those people who just believe in Jesus. See, if you believe in Jesus, you're called to be sent. You're called to go. And this is this reality. This is what they understood. This is what was significant. We are waiting on a voice, but we already have a verse. We already have all that we need in this. And let me help you to kind of get a picture of this, because here I believe this is fundamentally broken in the American church. Now, I believe that this is kind of a messed up idea, and that we have all these different ideas that are not biblical, but somehow are a part of what we're seeing in this. We see this idea of church in the context of boats. So let me give you 3 different boats that I have been on, actual boats. I'm going to give you pictures of actual boats that I've been on and how they've connected, or how I think the gospel is somehow, and how we understand the church is connected to seeing church as one of these 3 different kinds of boats. The first one is a cruise liner. I have a picture of the Carnival Freedom. There we go. I don't know where that's at, but that is this idea that somehow when I walked on that boat, everything is pointed to my comfort. Everything is pointed towards my entertainment. Everything is pointed to try to figure out if there's any need that I have, that there immediately I call upon the captain or the crew of that boat, and they're there to meet my needs, and they're there to entertain me, and they're there to make sure that I have everything that I have a desire for. And I think oftentimes in Christendom, this is kind of what this is. This is what we begin to see church as, that we come to church, and church is something where I get something. This is something where I'm entertained by the pastor, and I want to go someplace where this person tells funny stories and doesn't go too long and addresses my felt emotional needs, and a place where all these programs are here, or maybe if you're in the business world, where I can network and do business kind of context in this, and all these different things. But there's many people who church hop, and they go from church to church to figure out what is the nicest cruise liner in town. Can I figure out how to get to the place that has the poshest facilities, that has the most compelling entertainment on Sundays, and the thing that I just like the most? And this is what our viewpoint of church is in many ways. Another way to say this, or another way to look at this, is not that church is necessarily a cruise liner, but this next idea that church is a battleship. So this is the Battleship Texas. When you're in 3rd grade as a Texan and you live in the Houston area, you go to the Battleship Texas. This is just a part of those field trips. And in this battleship, it's a better idea than the cruise liner. But when we begin to see church as a battleship, what we begin to see as here we're all together, and we've hired these professional people, and we're going to kind of help them to load the gun, and they're going to tell us where to go, and it's going to make lots of noise and big explosions, and we're going to be in that midst. But still, here we're all together, and we're going to huddle together, and we're going to be in one context, and then we're going to shoot the guns at another context. And this is kind of the idea that oftentimes we have this battleship mentality. And I still think that that's not ultimately what the Bible says. This summer, I got to go down to San Diego to be a part of the Elevate project, and I got to go on this boat, and this is an aircraft carrier, and this is the USS Midway. And so in that battle, or that aircraft carrier was something it was amazing to be on. It was massive. And as we got to get on there and kind of understand what everything was built around, I began to think this makes a ton of sense for what the church is called to be. You see, aircraft carriers are never meant to be on the front lines of the battle. Aircraft carriers are meant to be able to equip and send out airplanes to be able to take the battle to the front lines. And then the airplanes return to the battle, or return to the carrier. And this is kind of how this battle is taken out. And at this point in our Navy, the most significant warship that we have are aircraft carriers, because they're designed to multiply their attacks and to be able to send these airplanes to the places that they need to go to carry out the commander's intent. And this is what church is meant to be. Not that we are all people that are saying, hey, I don't know whether I'm called or not, or I don't know what I should be doing on my own, and I'm coming to church, and I see it as a cruise ship, or I see it as a battleship. But church, here's what this is to be. Church, if we understand what Jesus has called us, every single one of us to, that church is called to be an aircraft carrier. And you are called to be airplanes, every single one of you. That you're loaded with potential and you're loaded with the Holy Spirit that has power, and that you're spread across this campus and you're spread across this city. And as you are spread across this, you're taking all that you need to be able to take the gospel to the places that need it most, strategically, with power, in this kind of way. This is how the church radically impacted a culture. Not when we understood this as people like me or our staff that get up here and lead, and everybody comes, and really this this event is all about. You see, our staff, I've told our staff that you've retired from doing ministry. You're now in the equipping idea of leadership. And in this, the goal of church is for you to be able to discover your potential and your power in Christ, so that he can use every single one of you to do incredible things. And this is what the context of the church is supposed to be. And this is what it looks like. Our job is to help you discover the power and potential that you have in Christ, to be able to take the gospel and send it out and multiply what it looks like in our context. This is this powerful idea. So I believe that oftentimes we think, am I called? Yes, you're called. You're called to a cause, every single one of you. You don't have to wait for a voice. You have a verse to send you out. The second thing is this, that we believe oftentimes that we're not qualified. That somehow the things that we have, that we're not as compelling as other people, or we don't have this gift set to be able to do this, or when we talk about Jesus, it doesn't come out in the same way as someone who's on stage and they talk about that. We somehow believe that somehow the things that we have been gifted in, the things that we have been given, aren't qualified to be used for the purpose and the mission of God. And I want to press into that. And to do this, I want to lead us to a passage of Scripture that really, I think, makes us uncomfortable. And I want to do this as your pastor, in order for you to get what Jesus is asking of each and every one of us. So if you have your copy of Scripture, you can go to Matthew 25. This is just a few chapters before he sends us out, and he's clarifying how he's created us to live out his mission. It says this. He's telling a story. In verse 14 of chapter 25, it says, "For it will be like the man going on a journey, who calls his servants and entrusts them to his property. To one he gave 5 talents, to another 2, and to another 1, to each according to his ability. Then he went away. He who had received the 5 talents went at once and traded them, and he made 5 talents more. So also he who had the 2 talents made 2 talents more. But he had received the 1 talent went and dug in the ground and hid his master's money. Now after a long time, the master of these servants came and settled accounts with them. And he had received the 5 talents, came forward, bringing 5 talents more, saying, Master, you delivered to me 5 talents. Here I've made 5 talents more. His master said to him, Well done, good and faithful servant. You've been faithful over little. I will set you over much. Enter into the joy of your master. And he also, who had 2 talents, came forward, saying, Master, you delivered to me 2 talents. Here I've made 2 talents more. His master said to him, Well done, good and faithful servant. You've been faithful over little. I will set you over much. Enter into the joy of your master. You see this theme happening here, right? Then we get to number 1. He who had also received 1 talent came forward, saying, Master, I knew you to be a hard man, reaping where you did not sow, gathering where you scattered no seed. But I was afraid, and I went and hid your talent in the ground. He's Here, you have what is yours." But his master answered him, "You wicked and slothful servant. You knew that I reap where I did not sow and gather where I scattered no seed. Then you ought to have invested my money with the bankers, and at my coming I should have received what was my own with interest. So take the talent from him and give it to the one who has 10 talents. For everyone who has more will be given. He who has an abundance. But the one who has not, even what he has will be taken away." And he casts the worthless servant into the outer darkness, into the place. In that place there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. Now that's a long story. But what I want us to get and what I want you to understand is just how powerful and specific that Jesus is talking about this. See, they understood something. In that context, talent is an amount of money. This is a resource that God has given to us. But I think that in the same way, we can talk about more than just the money that God has given to us, but the talent and the skill and the ability that God has given us in order to be able to earn money in that kind of way. And this is what God is saying, that they began to understand that everything that they possessed ultimately was given to them by God. This was a given in this context, that everything that they got was given to them by God. And I think for each and every one of us, we might understand that there are natural things that we are very good at. There's natural skills, there are natural abilities that we have, and there's some ways that we can sharpen those, that we can accelerate those, but ultimately there's some things that we are really good at, and there's some stuff that we just aren't very good at. And those realities are unique to us. Those are different. We have different kind of things in this. And in this, what they begin to have this revelation of is two of them understood that what Jesus was at, or what their master was asking them to do, was to take and use their God-given talents in order to accomplish something greater. And this was the will that the master had set out before them. One of them didn't understand that. One of them didn't understand that at all, and he took and said, "Okay, I'm going to take and I'm going to bury this, and I'm going to put this away." And here's this reality: is when we begin to understand this, it's not like this dude wrecked his life, right? When we begin to understand, he came back, the master came back and said, "Everything's intact." And I think it's a little bit like saying this: "Hey, God, I lived a really moral life. I lined up my life like you said in the Word, that I didn't go too far, that I didn't wreck my life, that I didn't destroy this thing. I tried to stay within the straight and narrow, God. And so here's this reality. God, here's my life. And here's what this looks like." But here's what Jesus does. We expect to say, you know what? You didn't get fully actualized in your life. Like you could have had more and you could have done a little bit more, but hey, it's okay. Way to not lose what you had. Jesus says, "You wicked servant." He curses the person that takes what they've been given and just tries not to lose it, tries not to risk it, tries to keep it in something that's safe. Man, this is a mind-blowing thing. And it's even hard for me to preach this to you because of how significant and what this means. That Jesus is saying to us, "I've given you the clarity of the mission that I've called you to, and I've given you these talents, these gifts for you to be able to use to multiply who you are and multiply these realities that you've been gifted in. And when you play it safe instead of living sent, you are not following the script that I've laid out for you." That somehow you don't understand this. And this seems really extreme, but let's look a little closer to what this looks like. God comes, he takes, and he sacrifices his son. For those of you who are parents, you get just a little bit of the context of the sacrifice of what God says that he is going to do. That I'm going to give wicked humanity my dearest possession, my son, a part of myself, and I'm going to send him to earth so that he might be able to ultimately right what is wrong. And as he does this, what I'm going to do is to take this beautiful thing and I'm going to put it on display in Jesus. And what he accomplishes is going to be worth the pain and sacrifice that it creates. And it's going to be worth it because it's going to bring all of humanity back to the relationship that they are called to have with me. And here's what he says: "Okay, instead of pulling pulling Jesus and saying, hey, Jesus, this is what you're going to do. You're going to be this conduit. You're going to ultimately, over and over, say this. He says, I'm going to give you this mission. I'm going to give humanity this mission. But when humanity takes what God has done and says, you've given me the mandate, and you've given me these gifts and abilities, you've given me all these things to be able to do this, but I'm going to take this and I'm going to bury this. It makes no sense to God. It makes no sense to God. He says, I've done this to redeem to restore the world. I've given the best news ever. I've given the mission to these people. And Jesus says, this doesn't make sense. To reveal the greatest story ever told, and I'm going to bury it. And there's many of us who believe if we play prevent defense in our life and we try to stay moral, that somehow we're going to stand before God and he's going to say, good job not being too sinful. Good job, trying not to, it was hard. There's a lot of temptation. Over and over, what we see in the Bible is that people that live lives that say, I'm going to be out there and I'm going to make mistakes, but I'm going to try. I'm going to put some risk out there. I'm going to live life on purpose. This is what we see. And as your pastor, here's what I want to do. I've said this over and over. I want to prepare you for the moment that you stand before your Heavenly Father. And I don't want there to be any surprises, because I believe if there are surprises in your life, that's a bad on me, because I haven't revealed the word to you. But I need you to know that it's not good enough just to say, I'm going to try to be moral. I'm going to just try to be a good person. He said, if you understand who I am, if you understand the gospel, you live the gospel. That if you don't live the gospel, you likely don't know the gospel. You don't understand the good news. I know that's really harsh, but I need for us to have clarity in this. And this is what it looks like for us when we understand how this all comes out, how this plays out. For us to understand all the things in our life. Our lives are filled with a lot of what's, a lot of things that we do. And I want us to have clarity. And I want to show you a clip, maybe that just helps us describe the difference between us living a life that we just kind of have our mindset set, this is what I'm going to do, this is how I'm going to live my life, and living it in a context of the why. So you can check this out.
Director. Cool.
Yes, sir.
All right, so let me get a couple bars of like Amazing Grace. Can you do the first part of that? Go ahead.
Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me.
Wow. That bro could sing. You know what I'm saying? All right. Now, what you give me the version is if your uncle just got out of jail, you got shot in the back when you was a kid. I'm just saying, let me see the hood version real quick, if you know which version I'm talking about. Just see if that exists. Let me see what you got.
Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me.
Did you get what happened there? See, the first time he sung, he knew what he was doing. But the second time he sung, he knew why he was doing it. He understood. You see, the why gives impact to your what. That you begin to, when you see this, you begin to understand how you're to live life, when you begin to understand why. And so I want you to know you've been given some gifts and some skills. Some of you are good at making friends. Some of you guys are good at math. Some of you guys are good at chemistry. Some of you are good at just art and music and all these things. These are given to you by God. These are God saying, I've put these in your life. Some of you have skills. Some of you have passions. And they're not like other people's passions, but somehow deep within you, you have a heart for something that no one else has. God wants to leverage that. For some of you, who you are, your ethnicity, your color of your skin, the history in your life, they are all unique things that allow you to do unique things, not just for your success in the cycle of life, but your significance in God's story. And this is the powerful, powerful thing that you might look back at a part of your history and say, why did God allow that to happen? But you need to understand that in the context of the story of God, that He is going to take all the things that make up your life and point them to something where you understand the why. And this changes and creates an interesting fabric and melody to your life that transforms it to something that you have immense amounts of joy in. And I want you to experience that, and I want you to grasp that, and I want you to have every single day where you know what you're living towards, and for you not to say, will this matter? Is this going to be meaningless? But for you to know that because I'm living out what God has called me to do, leveraging my gifts and my skills and my histories and my passion and my burden. And then we begin to see this, and we see this collision of need in the world, and you begin to see this overwhelming reality that comes out of you, this satisfaction, this deep joy, an abiding reality. When you see the collision of God using you and the gospel and colliding with the need in the world and saying, this is what I've created for. This is your superpower. We see every time when there's this moment where these superheroes realize this is what I have all this stuff for. And I want you to experience that. And I want you to understand that. For me, there's a moment in my life where I recognized what sent really looked like. And I realized what this actually looked like in my life. And it was my sophomore year when I was in college. I decided that I was going to give God 10 weeks. And I said, okay, God, this is me being incredibly generous. I'm going to give you my summer. I'm going to give you 10 weeks. And I said, but if I give you 10 weeks, I get to choose where this is going to be. And so I said I wanted to go to Colorado and be a guide for a rafting company, right? Really wanted to suffer for Jesus, right? So in this, I was like, okay, I get to choose where, you choose if, right? And so I go to this group of people that's kind of sending people, and they say, yeah, Keith, we don't think that you should go to Colorado as a raft guide. We actually think you should go to Estonia. And I was like, what's in Estonia, right? I didn't know what this country was, much like you maybe in this moment. And it is a country, it's one of the Baltic states, but I went there my junior year. And I'm over there, and I'm just like, man, okay, just me getting on the plane and leaving, this is just, I'm such an amazing human. I have like I'm collecting all these things in heaven and all this stuff. And at the same time, I'm just complaining because we only got to take showers like once a week, and I didn't like the food, and all this stuff was just a part of this, and I'm just whining, and I have this free time. And before I left, this guy gives me a tape and said, hey, you should listen to this sermon. A tape, yeah, I don't know if you know what that is, but a tape. And in that, so I put that into this tape player, and I'm just having this lousy attitude, and it was a sermon by a guy named Paris Reedhead called 10 Shekels in a Shirt. And I'm listening to it, and at the very end, he tells a story. And I want to read this to you. It says this. It tells the story of two young Moravians. They heard of an island in the West Indies where an atheist British owner had 2,000 to 3,000 slaves. And the owner had said, no preacher, no clergyman will ever stay on this island. If he's shipwrecked, we'll keep him in a separate house until he has to leave. But he's never going to talk to any of us about God. I'm through with that nonsense. So 3,000 slaves from the jungles of Africa brought to an island in the Atlantic to live and die without ever hearing of Christ. So two young Moravians, part of this movement, the Moravian brethren heard about it. They sold themselves into slavery to the British planter and used the money that they received for their sale to pay for their passage to his island because he wouldn't even transport them there. And as they boarded the ship and as it began to leave its pier in the river of Hamburg, and was going out into the North Sea, carried with the tide. The Moravians who had come from Herrenhut to see these lads off, all in their early 20s. They looked up and they looked down. They understood never to return again, for this wasn't a 4-year term. They had sold themselves into lifetime slavery. Simply, that as slaves, they could be used as Christians where those other people were. And the families were there weeping, for they knew they would never see them again. And they wondered why they were going and questioned the wisdom of it all. And as the gap widened and the housings had been cast off and we were being curled around the pier, and the young boys saw the widening gap, one lad with his arm linked through the arm of another raised his hand and shouted across the increasing gap the last words that were heard from them. And they were these words: "May the Lamb that was slain receive the reward of his suffering." May the Lamb that was slain receive the reward of his suffering. And if you know anything about history, these became the words that the Moravians, one of the most significant missionary movements that we've ever seen in this globe, these are the words that they would say. And in that moment, I listened to this, and here I was thinking of myself all self-righteous, hearing these things and recognizing a deep truth in my life, and I just began to bawl there. Not as hard as Con Air, but I began to bawl. And I began to be overwhelmed with this reality that I had been living in a world that was defined by how much I could get out of God. But the joy was found not in how much I could get out of God, but in how much God could get out of me. This was a huge moment that changed my life. That joy doesn't come by discovering how much we can get out of God. Joy comes by discovering how much God can get out of us. And my life was forever changed. See, I didn't dream of coming to the Northwest and being a pastor in Pullman. I didn't dream of this. But what happened in the next 18 months is I said, God, whatever, it's yes. God, I don't have a whole lot. I don't have a huge gift set, but if you can use me, I'm available. If you can send me, I want to be sent. No strings attached. And at that moment, for 21 years, God had been silent on this. God had not been clarifying in this at all. And all of a sudden, he began to speak to my life in a significant way. Everyone's called to be sent, but he began to say, here's exactly what I want you to do with your life. And he began to clarify. And I think some of you are a prayer away from the clarity that you desire. And I want to ask you guys to just have the courage to be able to say, God, if I gave you this, what would you do with it? Every single one of us. I want your what to be transformed by the why, so that every day, whether you're in business, whether you're in school, whether you're someone who says, man, my dream is not to start a church, Keith. My dream is to start a business. My dream is to be in the academic world. My dream is to be in this or that, or start a nonprofit or whatever it is. Do this with the why of being sent in your life, and begin to ask God, all that I have, all that I possess, how can I use this to accomplish your mission? I challenge you to be able to say, it's yours. And I promise you, you will not have a meaningless life.